The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Ukiah, California depot, just as the sun reached its highest point in the June sky of 1882. And when the door swung open, Harrison Mitchell knew his carefully ordered world was about to change forever. He had been leaning against the weathered post outside the general store, hat tilted low against the glare, watching the dust settle around the wheels. His older brother Thomas had arranged this whole affair through letters, and a marriage broker back east, insisting that Harrison needed a wife to help settle the ranch they had built together over the past decade. Harrison had reluctantly agreed, expecting a quiet, biddable woman who would be grateful for the opportunity to escape whatever hardships she faced in the crowded cities. What emerged from that stagecoach was nothing like what he had imagined. She wore a traveling dress of deep burgundy that had probably started the journey looking respectable, but now bore the dust and wrinkles of 2 weeks on the road. Her dark hair, which should have been pinned up properly beneath her bonnet, had partly escaped its confines, curling wildly around her face. But it was her eyes that caught him first, sharp and assessing as they swept across the small town, taking in everything with an intelligence that made something in his chest tighten with unexpected interest. The driver handed down her trunk, and she immediately reached for it herself, waving off his assistance with an impatient gesture. Harrison straightened from his post and started forward, his long legs covering the distance between them in a few strides. "Miss Rose Zimmerman?" he asked, removing his hat as he approached. She turned those sharp eyes on him, and he felt the impact of her direct gaze like a physical thing. Most women he knew would have looked down demurely or offered a shy smile. She simply studied him with the same frank assessment she had given the town. "And you would be Harrison Mitchell, I assume," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, with an edge to it that suggested she was already forming opinions about him and might not be entirely pleased with her conclusions. "Yes, madam. Welcome to Ukiah." He reached for her trunk. "Let me get that for you. I can manage my own belongings, thank you." She kept her hand on the leather handle. "I have been doing so for the past 2 weeks." Harrison felt his eyebrows rise. Around them, he could sense the townspeople who had gathered to see the new arrival beginning to whisper. Word would spread fast about the mail-order bride who refused simple courtesy from her intended husband. "I do not doubt your capability," he said carefully, keeping his voice even. "But folks around here might think it odd if I let my intended wife haul her own trunk to the hotel." Something flickered in her expression, and he could not quite read whether it was annoyance or amusement. "Your reputation is that fragile," despite himself. Harrison felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Not mine so much, but you will be living here too once we are married. Might be easier if folks think well of you from the start." She considered this for a moment, then released her grip on the trunk. "A practical point. Very well." He hefted the trunk easily, well used to hard physical labor, and gestured toward the small hotel at the end of the main street. As they walked, he was acutely aware of her beside him. She did not walk with the small, careful steps most women took. Her stride was longer, more confident, and he found himself adjusting his pace without thinking about it. "The town is smaller than I expected," Rose said, looking around at the scattered buildings that made up Ukiah's main thoroughfare. "How many people live here?" "About 400 in the town itself, more in the surrounding ranches and farms." He nodded toward a few of the buildings. "We have got everything we need, though. General store, doctor, school, 2 churches, and a few other establishments. Saloons," he glanced at her in surprise. "3 of them. Not places a lady would have any business with." "No, I imagine not." Her tone was dry. "Just getting a sense of the town's priorities." Harrison felt that tug of amusement again, stronger this time. He had expected to be annoyed by whatever woman arrived on that stagecoach, resigned to making the best of a practical arrangement. He had not expected to be entertained. They reached the hotel, and Mrs. Patterson, the owner, came bustling out before they could even climb the steps. She was a round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an insatiable curiosity about everyone's business. "This must be Miss Zimmerman." "Oh, my dear, you must be exhausted from your journey. Come in, come in. Harrison, you bring that trunk right up to the room. I have given her the best one we have got, the one with the window facing the mountains." Rose allowed herself to be swept inside, and Harrison followed with the trunk. He could hear Mrs. Patterson's constant chatter as they climbed the stairs, asking questions about the journey and barely pausing for answers. Rose responded with polite brevity, and he got the sense she was conserving her energy, letting the older woman's words wash over her without fully engaging. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and the promised window with its view of the hills rising beyond town. Harrison set the trunk down carefully and turned to find Rose already at the window, looking out at the landscape. "We will let you rest," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "I will bring up some hot water for washing, and there is a dining room downstairs if you want supper later. Harrison, you come along now and let the poor girl have some peace." Harrison nodded and moved toward the door, but Rose's voice stopped him. "When do you expect we will be married?" He turned back. She was still at the window, but she had turned her head to look at him. Her expression was neutral, but there was something in her eyes that might have been wariness or might have been challenge. "I thought we might take a few days," he said. "Give you time to settle in, get to know the town. We can talk about things, make sure this is what we both want to do." Her eyebrows rose. "And if I decide it is not what I want?" Mrs. Patterson made a small, shocked sound, but Harrison kept his attention on Rose. "Then I expect we will figure out what comes next. I am not in the habit of forcing anyone to do anything they do not want to do." For the first time since she had stepped off that stagecoach, Rose's expression softened slightly. "That is good to know." He nodded and followed Mrs. Patterson out, but as they descended the stairs, he could feel the older woman practically vibrating with the need to speak. As soon as they reached the bottom, she grabbed his arm. "Harrison Mitchell, that girl is not what you expected, is she?" "No, madam, she is not. She seems very headstrong, very independent." Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested this was not entirely a compliment. "She does." Harrison settled his hat back on his head and looked up toward the second floor, though he could not see the room from where they stood. "She also seems intelligent and honest. Could be worse qualities in a wife. But Harrison, a woman needs to be biddable, especially on a ranch. You need help, not arguments." He thought about the way Rose had looked at him, that direct gaze that did not flinch away from anything. He thought about the small smile that had almost appeared when he had made his practical argument about her reputation. And he thought about the long, lonely years on the ranch with nothing but work and his brother's company, the way the days had started to blur together into a sameness that left him feeling hollow. "Maybe I have had enough of things being easy," he heard himself say. "Maybe I need someone who challenges me." Mrs. Patterson looked at him as if he had lost his mind, and perhaps he had. But as he stepped back out into the bright afternoon sun and started the walk back to the ranch, Harrison found himself looking forward to the next few days in a way he had not looked forward to anything in a long time. The ranch was about 5 miles outside town, a good spread of land with a sturdy house, a barn, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the handful of men they employed. Thomas was working with one of the horses when Harrison rode in, and he straightened immediately, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Well, what is she like?" Thomas was 2 years older than Harrison's 28, with the same tall build but a more serious disposition. Their parents had died when Harrison was 16, and Thomas had taken on the responsibility of raising him while building their ranch from nothing. "Not what we expected," Harrison said, dismounting and leading his horse toward the barn. Thomas fell into step beside him. "Is she difficult? Unattractive? What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong exactly." Harrison tried to find the right words. "She is just different, strong-willed, speaks her mind. Carries her own trunk." Thomas frowned. "You need a helpmate, Harrison, someone who will take care of the house and eventually children, not someone who will make your life harder." "I know what you think I need." Harrison unsaddled his horse with practiced efficiency. "But maybe what I need and what you think I need are not the same thing. This is not a joke. We have built something good here and it needs a woman's touch to become a real home, but the wrong woman could make everything worse." Harrison turned to face his brother. "Give her a chance. Give me a chance to get to know her before you decide she is wrong." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But Harrison, be careful. You have always been too inclined to go your own way without thinking about the consequences." That was true enough, Harrison supposed. Thomas was the planner, the one who thought 3 steps ahead. Harrison was the one who followed his instincts, sometimes to his benefit and sometimes not. But something about Rose Zimmerman called to those instincts in a way that made him want to see where this path might lead. The next morning, he rode back into town. He had told himself he would give her a day to rest, but by the time the sun was fully up, he found himself saddling his horse and making excuses to Thomas about needing supplies. His brother had given him a knowing look but said nothing. He found Rose at the general store, examining bolts of fabric with a critical eye. She wore a different dress today, a simple gray one that was more practical than pretty, and her hair was properly pinned up under a sensible bonnet. Somehow, the attempt at conformity only made her seem more out of place, as if she were wearing a costume that did not quite fit. "Good morning," he said, approaching her. She looked up, and he thought he saw something like relief flicker across her face before she schooled it back to neutrality. "Mr. Mitchell, good morning, Harrison, please. I figure if we are considering marrying each other, we can use first names." "Very well, Harrison." She turned back to the fabric. "I was thinking about what you said yesterday about making a good impression. I suppose a new dress would not go amiss, something more appropriate for the climate here." "That is practical." He moved to stand beside her, looking at the bolts without really seeing them, though I admit I do not know much about women's fashions. "That makes 2 of us." At his questioning look, she added, "I have never been particularly interested in such things. My mother despaired of me, but I understand the importance of appearances." "Your mother," he said carefully. "Is she back east? She died 3 years ago. Influenza." Rose's voice was matter-of-fact, but her hands stilled on the fabric. "My father died when I was young. I was living with my aunt in Boston, but she recently remarried, and her new husband made it clear there was no longer room for me in the household." Harrison felt a flash of anger toward a man he had never met. "So you became a mail-order bride. So I took control of my own fate rather than waiting for someone else to decide it for me." She looked at him directly. "There is a difference." "Yes," he said slowly, "I suppose there is, Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, came over to help Rose with her selections." Harrison wandered toward the front of the store, nodding to a few of the men who were gathered around the pot-bellied stove, despite the summer heat. They were the town's informal council of gossips, and he knew they would have plenty to say about Rose. "Your bride seems like she has got some steel in her spine," old Pete Garvin said, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Heard she would not let you carry her trunk at first." "She is independent," Harrison agreed. "Nothing wrong with that. Independent women are trouble," Pete said, shaking his head. Mark my words, you want someone who will listen to you, not argue with every little thing." Harrison felt his jaw tighten. "I think I can decide what I want in a wife without your help, Pete." The other men chuckled, and Pete held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just trying to save you some grief, son, but you always were the stubborn Mitchell boy." Harrison turned away, biting back a sharper retort. He knew there was no point in arguing with Pete or the others. They had their ideas about how the world should work, and nothing he said would change them. But it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The way they talked about Rose as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. When Rose finished her purchases, Harrison offered to walk her back to the hotel. She accepted, and they fell into step together, her parcels in his arms. "You do not have to defend me," she said after they had walked a short distance. He glanced at her in surprise. "You heard that. I have excellent hearing. And I have been hearing variations of that conversation for most of my life." She looked straight ahead, her expression unreadable. "My mother used to say I was too bold for my own good. My aunt said I would never find a husband with my sharp tongue and sharper opinions. Perhaps they were right." "Or perhaps they were wrong," Harrison said. "Perhaps you just had not found the right person yet." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw uncertainty in her eyes for the first time. "And you think you might be the right person? You barely know me." "That is true. But I would like to know you." He stopped walking, and she stopped too. "I have a proposition. Give it a week. Spend time with me, let me show you the ranch, talk to me. At the end of the week, if you do not think this will work, I will give you money for the stage coach back east and enough extra to get settled somewhere. No obligations." "That is very generous. What do you get out of this arrangement, honestly?" "I do not know yet." He smiled at her surprised expression. "I just know that for the first time in a long while, I am curious about something beyond the next day's work. That seems worth exploring." Rose was quiet for a long moment, and he could almost see her thinking, weighing options and possibilities. Finally, she nodded. "1 week. But I want to be clear, I am not a project for you to work on. If we do this, it will be because we choose each other as equals, not because you think you can mold me into something more suitable." "Agreed." He held out his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. Her grip was firm and sure, and something warm unfurled in his chest at the contact. Over the next few days, Harrison made good on his promise. He arrived at the hotel each morning and took Rose around the area, showing her the ranch, introducing her to the men who worked there, explaining how everything operated. She asked intelligent questions and paid close attention to his answers, and he found himself enjoying the teaching in a way he had not expected. Thomas remained polite but distant, clearly reserving judgment. The ranch hands were more obviously curious, stealing glances at Rose when they thought she was not looking. To her credit, she ignored the attention and focused on learning about the place that might become her home. On the third day, he took her up into the hills behind the ranch, to a spot where you could see for miles in every direction. The grass was golden in the summer heat, and the sky stretched out in an endless blue dome above them. They dismounted and stood together, looking out at the view. "It is beautiful," Rose said quietly. "So much space. In Boston, everything felt closed in, cramped. Here you can breathe." "That is why I love it," Harrison said. "Thomas and I worked so hard to build the ranch, and there were times I thought we would fail. But standing up here, seeing what we have created, it makes it all worthwhile." Rose turned to look at him. "You and your brother are close. We are all each other has had for a long time. Our parents died of fever when I was 16, Thomas 18. We could have sold their small farm and gone our separate ways, but Thomas insisted we stick together. He gave up his own plans to make sure I was provided for. What were his plans? He wanted to be a teacher. He was always the smart one, the one who loved books and learning. Harrison picked up a small stone and tossed it down the hillside. But he put that aside to work the land, and then when we had enough saved, we came out here to California and started over. Everything I have, I owe to him. And now he wants to make sure you have a wife and a family, Rose said. He wants to see you settled. He wants to know his sacrifices meant something, yes, but that is not the only reason I agreed to this. Harrison turned to face her fully. I am lonely, Rose. The work is good and I am proud of what we have built, but at the end of the day, I go to bed in an empty house and I wake up to more of the same. I want more than that. I want a partner, someone to share the good days and the hard ones, someone to talk to when the sun sets and the work is done. Rose's expression had softened as he spoke, and when she replied, her voice was gentler than he had heard it before. I understand loneliness. After my mother died, my aunt took me in out of obligation, not love. I was useful for helping with the household, but I was never truly part of the family. When her new husband arrived, I became an inconvenience to be disposed of as quickly and quietly as possible. So we are both looking for a place to belong, Harrison said. Perhaps. She looked back out at the view. But belonging is not the same as love. What if we marry and find we do not suit? That we cannot be more than two lonely people sharing a house. That is a risk, Harrison admitted. But it is a risk in any marriage, is it not? Even people who court for years sometimes find they are not compatible once the vows are said. At least we are going into this with our eyes open, with honest expectations. And what are your expectations, Harrison? He thought about it carefully before answering. I expect us to be respectful of each other, honest with each other. I expect we will disagree sometimes, probably often, but that we will talk about it instead of letting resentment build. I expect you to have your own thoughts and opinions, and I will not try to silence them. And I hope, in time, we might build something more than just a practical arrangement. Something like friendship, at least. Maybe even love if we are lucky. Rose met his eyes, and he saw something vulnerable in her expression, something that made him want to reach out and pull her close. But he held himself still, letting her process what he had said. Those are good expectations, she said finally. Better than I had allowed myself to hope for. But Harrison, you need to know something about me. I am not good at being what people want me to be. I try and I fail and I end up disappointing everyone. I do not want to do that to you. Then do not try to be what you think I want, he said. Just be yourself. That is all I am asking for, she laughed, but it was a sad sound. You say that now, but what happens when my real self becomes inconvenient? When I speak up at the wrong time or challenge you in front of others or fail to be the perfect ranch wife? Harrison took a step closer to her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Then I expect we will figure it out together. Rose, I am not looking for perfect. I am looking for real, and from what I have seen so far, you are the most real person I have met in a long time. Something shifted in her expression, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. All right, let us do this. Let us get married and see what happens. Are you sure? No, she said honestly, but I am willing to try. That will have to be enough. They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of town. Rose wore a dress she had made herself from the fabric she had bought at the general store, a simple design in soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Harrison wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed with care. Thomas stood as his witness, and Mrs. Patterson stood for Rose, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief throughout the ceremony. The minister, Reverend Hollis, kept the service short and simple. When it came time for Harrison to say his vows, he looked into Rose's eyes and spoke the words with as much sincerity as he could muster. He saw her surprise at the emotion in his voice, and then she was saying her own vows, her voice steady and clear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison leaned down and kissed her gently. It was their first kiss, and he felt her stiffen slightly before relaxing into it. When they pulled apart, there was color in her cheeks and something like wonder in her eyes. There was a small reception at the hotel, with cake and punch and the handful of townspeople who had come to witness the wedding. Harrison stayed close to Rose's side, introducing her as his wife with a pride that surprised him. She handled the attention with grace, though he could see the strain around her eyes and knew she was not comfortable being the center of so much scrutiny. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, they made their excuses and headed out to the ranch. Harrison had borrowed the wagon for the occasion, and Rose's trunk and few belongings were already loaded in the back. She sat beside him on the seat, and they rode in companionable silence as the landscape rolled by. The ranch house looked welcoming in the fading light, its windows glowing warmly. Thomas had made himself scarce, heading into town for the evening to give them privacy, and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse, out of sight. Harrison helped Rose down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The house was simple but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, 2 bedrooms, and a small room that Harrison used as an office. He had made sure everything was as clean and orderly as possible, and he had picked wildflowers that morning, putting them in a jar on the kitchen table. Rose noticed them immediately, and her expression softened. "You did this. I wanted you to feel welcome," he said. "I know it is not much compared to what you might have had back east, but it is home." "It is more than I had hoped for," she said quietly, running her fingers over the petals of the wildflowers. "Thank you, Harrison." They had a simple supper of bread and cheese and cold chicken that Mrs. Patterson had packed for them. They sat at the table, and Harrison found himself telling her stories about the ranch, about the time one of the bulls got loose and chased him up a tree, about the winter when the snow had been so deep they had been trapped inside for a week. Rose listened and occasionally asked questions, and slowly the tension in her shoulders began to ease. When the meal was finished and the dishes were washed, an awkward silence fell between them. They were married now, and the bedroom door stood open like a question neither of them quite knew how to answer. "Rose," Harrison said carefully, "I want you to know that I have no expectations for tonight. You have had a long few days, and I imagine you are exhausted. We can take things slowly." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you. I admit I have been dreading this moment. Not because of you," she added hastily. "Just because I do not know you very well yet, and the idea of sharing a bed with a stranger is daunting." "I understand completely. How about this? You take the bedroom and I will sleep out here on the couch. It is comfortable enough, and that way you can have privacy until you feel more settled. But this is your home. I cannot force you out of your own bed. You are not forcing me anywhere." "I am offering," he smiled at her. "Besides, I have slept in worse places than a comfortable couch, believe me." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her reassessing him, perhaps surprised that he meant what he said. "You are very kind, Harrison, kinder than I expected." "Kindness is not so rare as you might think. You have just been around the wrong people." He gestured toward the bedroom. "Go on. Get some rest. Tomorrow we can start figuring out how this is all going to work." Rose nodded and moved toward the bedroom, but she paused at the door and looked back at him. "Harrison, I am glad I came here. I am glad I met you." "I am glad too," he said and meant it. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Rose took over the running of the household, cooking and cleaning and managing the domestic side of things with the same competent efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. Harrison continued his work on the ranch, but he made sure to come in for meals and spend the evenings with Rose, talking or sometimes just sitting together in comfortable silence. She continued to sleep in the bedroom, and he continued to sleep on the couch, though as the days passed, he found himself missing the idea of her presence beside him in the night. But he did not push. He had meant what he said about taking things slowly, and he could see her gradually relaxing around him, becoming more comfortable in her new home. Thomas had accepted Rose into the household with cautious politeness, but Harrison could tell his brother was still uncertain about the whole arrangement. One evening, after Rose had gone to bed, Thomas sat down with Harrison at the kitchen table. "She is not what I expected for you," Thomas said without preamble. "I know, she is not what I expected either, but you seem happy, happier than I have seen you in years." Thomas studied his younger brother's face. "That counts for something." "It counts for a lot," Harrison said. "She challenges me, Thomas, makes me think about things differently, and she is interesting. Every conversation with her goes somewhere I do not expect. As long as you are sure, I just do not want to see you hurt. I know, and I appreciate you looking out for me. But I think this is going to work. I really do." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then I am happy for you, for both of you." It was about a month after the wedding when things between Harrison and Rose began to shift in a more profound way. They were working together in the garden Rose had started behind the house, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables that were beginning to grow. The afternoon was hot, and Harrison had rolled up his sleeves and abandoned his hat. Rose had done the same, her face flushed from the heat and exertion. "I never thought I would enjoy this kind of work," she said, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead. "But there is something satisfying about it, about putting your hands in the dirt and making things grow." "It is honest work," Harrison agreed. "You can see the results of your effort. Not like the needlework and social calls that were supposed to occupy my time in Boston." She made a face. "I was never any good at either of those things. My stitches were always uneven and my conversation was apparently too direct for polite society." Harrison laughed. "Their loss is my gain, then." She looked at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "Do you really think that?" "I do." He set down the tool he had been using and moved closer to her. "Rose, I want you to know something. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you make this place into a home, it has been the best time I can remember. You have brought something here that was missing, and it is not just having someone to cook and clean. It is you, your spirit, your intelligence, your stubbornness, all of it." "Harrison." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. "I feel the same way. I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid to let myself hope that this could be more than just a practical arrangement. But when I am with you, I feel like I can be myself, like I do not have to pretend or hide the parts of me that made everyone else uncomfortable. And that is a gift I never thought I would have." He reached out and cupped her face gently in his hand, his thumb brushing against her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she met him halfway. This kiss was different from the brief one they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was deeper, full of promise and growing desire. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I think," Rose said, her voice shaking slightly, "that I am falling in love with you." "Good," Harrison said, pulling her close, "because I am definitely falling in love with you." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms in the middle of the garden, the vegetables growing around them and the sun beating down from above. Harrison felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that he had never experienced before. That night when they went inside and prepared for bed, Rose paused at the bedroom door. "Will you come to bed with me?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "I think I am ready. I think I have been ready for a while now." Harrison did not need to be asked twice. He followed her into the bedroom, and when he closed the door behind them, he felt like they were closing the door on the last of their uncertainty. What happened between them that night was tender and careful, both of them learning each other's bodies and rhythms, both of them giving and receiving in equal measure. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Rose traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I never knew it could be like that," she said. "The other women I knew in Boston, they made it sound like a duty to be endured, but that was beautiful." "It is beautiful when two people care about each other," Harrison said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I do care about you, Rose. More than I knew it was possible to care about someone. I care about you too. I think I started caring about you that first day when you said you needed someone who challenged you. That was when I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Harrison slept better than he had in years. The summer passed into fall, and their love continued to deepen. Rose became more integrated into the community, though she never quite conformed to what people expected. She spoke her mind at church socials, offered her opinions on town matters when asked and sometimes when not asked, and generally refused to be anything other than herself. Some of the townspeople did not know what to make of her, but others came to appreciate her honesty and intelligence. Harrison watched her navigate the social dynamics with a mixture of pride and amusement. She did not need him to fight her battles, but he always made sure she knew he supported her. And when they were alone together, she let down her guard completely, showing him the softer parts of herself that she kept hidden from the world. One evening in October, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun set, Rose turned to him with a particular expression he had come to recognize. It meant she had something important to say and was working up to it. "What is it?" he asked, taking her hand. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Harrison felt his heart stop and then start again, beating twice as fast. "You are sure?" "Yes. I have been certain for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be absolutely sure before I told you." She searched his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy," he laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Rose, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We are going to have a baby." "We are," she agreed, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "In the spring, I think. Probably April or May." They sat there together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, planning and dreaming about the future. Harrison thought about his own childhood, about the love his parents had shown him before they died, and he vowed to give his child that same love and more. Thomas was delighted when they told him the news. "I am going to be an uncle," he said, shaking Harrison's hand and then, surprisingly, pulling Rose into a gentle hug. "This is wonderful. The ranch will have a new generation." The pregnancy was not easy. Rose suffered from sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, she became uncomfortable and tired. But through it all, she maintained her spirit and her humor. Harrison did everything he could to help, taking on more of the household tasks and making sure she rested when she needed to. On a warm April evening, Rose went into labor. Harrison sent one of the ranch hands racing into town for the doctor and the midwife, while he stayed with Rose, holding her hand and trying not to show his own fear. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Harrison thought he might lose his mind with worry, but Rose remained strong even when she was exhausted. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Rose's arms, and Harrison felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. "He is beautiful," Rose whispered, her own face streaked with tears of exhaustion and joy. "Look what we made, Harrison." "You did the hard part," Harrison said, kissing her forehead. "You are amazing, so strong." They named him Henry after Harrison's father, with the middle name of Robert after Rose's father. Little Henry was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs, and he quickly became the center of their world. The first months were exhausting, with sleepless nights and constant demands, but Harrison and Rose worked together to manage it all. Harrison was a hands-on father, helping with feedings and diaper changes, and walking Henry around the house when he was fussy. Rose nursed the baby and sang to him, and Harrison would often find her in the rocking chair with Henry in her arms, both of them sleeping peacefully. As Henry grew, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and active, always wanting to explore. He had Rose's dark hair and Harrison's blue eyes, and his smile could light up a room. Harrison loved watching Rose with their son, seeing the fierce love and protectiveness in her eyes. When Henry was about 6 months old, they had a scare. He developed a high fever and became listless, barely crying even when he was clearly uncomfortable. Rose was frantic, and Harrison rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor. Doctor Morrison came immediately, examining the baby with gentle thoroughness while Rose and Harrison watched anxiously. "It is an infection," the doctor said finally. "Not uncommon in babies this age. Keep him cool, give him plenty of fluids if he will take them, and watch him closely. It should pass in a few days, but if he gets worse, send for me immediately." Those few days were some of the longest of Harrison's life. He and Rose took turns sitting up with Henry, bathing him with cool water when his fever spiked, trying to get him to nurse. On the third day, the fever finally broke, and Henry began to show signs of returning to his normal self. The relief Harrison felt was overwhelming, and he held Rose while she cried tears of gratitude and exhaustion. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I thought we might lose him." "I know." "I was terrified too, but he is strong like his mother." "Like both his parents," Rose corrected. "We are a team, Harrison, in everything, always," he agreed. As Henry grew into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Harrison and Thomas expanded their operations, buying more land and increasing their herd. Rose proved to have a head for business, and Harrison often consulted with her about decisions, valuing her input and perspective. She also became involved in the town's new school, helping to organize fundraisers and serving on the school board alongside the men, much to the consternation of some of the more traditional townspeople. "Let them talk," she said, when Harrison expressed concern about the gossip. "I am doing good work, and I am not going to stop just because it makes people uncomfortable." "I would not want you to stop," Harrison said. "I just do not want you to be hurt by their small-mindedness." "I have dealt with worse," Rose assured him, "and besides, I have you. As long as I know you support me, I can handle anything else." When Henry was 2 years old, Rose became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and she remained active and involved in everything right up until the birth. Their second child, a daughter they named Ruth Elizabeth, was born in early autumn. She was smaller than Henry had been, with wisps of blonde hair and gray eyes that would eventually turn brown like her mother's. Ruth was a quieter baby than Henry had been, more content to observe than to demand attention. But she had her own strong will, and as she grew, it became clear she had inherited her mother's stubborn streak. Harrison loved watching his family grow, loved the chaos and noise and constant activity that filled their home. Thomas, who had been married himself to a kind woman named Judith a year after Harrison and Rose's wedding, had 2 children of his own now. The cousins played together, and the ranch felt truly alive with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. One evening, when Henry was 5 and Ruth was 3, Harrison and Rose sat together on the porch after the children were in bed. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day when they could talk and simply be with each other. "You remember when you first arrived?" Harrison asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking like you were ready to take on the world." "I remember being terrified," Rose admitted. "I had no idea what I was getting into coming out here to marry a stranger, but I was determined not to show it. You succeeded. You looked fearless." He kissed her temple. "And then you refused to let me carry your trunk." "I wanted to make it clear I was not some helpless female who needed taking care of." She laughed softly. "I think I probably seemed very difficult. You seemed interesting. And when those old men started talking about you like you were a problem, I realized I did not want someone easy. I wanted someone who would challenge me, make me think, keep me on my toes. And then I said it out loud, and it became true." "I heard you say that to Mrs. Patterson," Rose confessed. "I was at the top of the stairs, and I heard you tell her you needed someone who challenged you. That was when I started to believe that maybe this could work. You never told me that. I was not ready to admit it then. I was still protecting myself, still afraid to hope." She turned in his arms to look at him. "But Harrison, you have given me everything I never dared to dream about. A home, a family, a partnership where I am valued and respected. And more than that, a love that grows deeper every day. I am so grateful I stepped off that stagecoach and found you waiting for me." "I am the grateful one," Harrison said. "You changed my life, Rose. You brought color and passion and purpose to days that were just going through the motions. You challenged me to be better, to think bigger, to feel more deeply. And you gave me our children, our beautiful family." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "I love you more than I have words to express." "Then show me," she whispered, and he did, kissing her with all the love and devotion he felt. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. They added one more child to their family, a son named James who was born when Henry was 7. James was a perfect blend of his parents, with Harrison's easygoing nature and Rose's quick mind. The ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of Harrison and Thomas, and Rose became known throughout the region for her business acumen and her forthright manner. She was elected to the school board officially and later helped establish a lending library in town. She never stopped being exactly who she was, never let anyone tell her she should be smaller or quieter or more conforming, and Harrison never stopped being proud of her. He loved her fierce intelligence, her unwavering principles, her tender heart that she showed only to those closest to her. He loved the way she was with their children, firm but loving, encouraging them to think for themselves and stand up for what they believed in. He loved the way she was with him, challenging him when she thought he was wrong, supporting him when he needed it, loving him with a constancy that never wavered. Henry grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch and wanted to continue the family legacy. Ruth became a teacher, following in the path her Uncle Thomas had once dreamed of, and later opened her own school. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for art and eventually went to San Francisco to study, though he always came home for long visits. As Harrison and Rose grew older, their love only deepened. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. There had been droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that scared them, disagreements that required hard conversations and compromise. But through it all, they had remained partners, facing everything together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Rose back up to the hillside where he had first told her he was lonely and wanted a partner. They were both gray-haired now, with lines on their faces that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun and smiling at each other. But when Harrison looked at Rose, he saw the same woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, ready to challenge the world. 25 years, Rose said, looking out at the view that was as familiar to her now as her own reflection. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. A good forever, Harrison said, the best forever. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her. You know, when I was that scared young woman getting off the stagecoach, I would never have believed that my life could turn out like this. I thought I would have a functional marriage at best, a tolerable situation that would keep me fed and housed. I never imagined I would find this kind of love. Neither did I, Harrison admitted. I thought I would get a helpmate, someone to ease the loneliness. I never imagined I would find my other half, the person who makes me complete. They stood there together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Below them, the ranch spread out, the house where they had raised their children, the barns and corrals where they had built their livelihood, the land they had worked and loved and made their own. You have any regrets? Rose asked quietly. Harrison thought about it carefully. No, he said finally. There are things I might have done differently, mistakes I made along the way, but I do not regret any of it because it all led to this. To us, to our family, to this life we built together. What about you? My only regret, Rose said, is that I wasted so many years before I came here. But then again, maybe I needed those years to become the person I needed to be to meet you, so perhaps not even that is a regret. Everything in its right time, Harrison said. Everything in its right time, she agreed. They grew old together on the ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching new generations carry on what they had built. Harrison still worked every day until the day he could not anymore, and Rose continued to be involved in the community, her sharp mind and sharper tongue undulled by age. On a warm spring morning, when Harrison was 72 and Rose was 69, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Henry was running the ranch now, with his own children helping. Ruth visited often from town with her family, and James was expected next week from San Francisco. This is a good life, Harrison said, holding Rose's hand. It is, she agreed, the very best kind of life. I need to tell you something, Harrison said, something I never told you properly. That day you arrived, when I saw you step off that stagecoach, I was not ready for you. I had convinced myself I just needed someone practical, someone who would fit into the life I had already built. But you did not fit, and that was the best thing that could have happened to me. Rose smiled, squeezing his hand. You were not quite what I expected either, but you were everything I needed. You challenged me, Harrison said. Every day you challenged me to be better, to think differently, to live more fully, and every day I was grateful for it. I still am. You are the love of my life, Rose Mitchell, the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine, Rose said, her eyes bright with tears. My partner, my love, my home. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the sky, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their high voices carrying on the wind. The cattle lowed in the pastures, and the horses whinnied in the corrals. Life went on, generation after generation, built on the foundation that Harrison and Rose had laid with their love and hard work. As evening fell and the sky turned purple and gold, Rose leaned her head on Harrison's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They had weathered so much together, built so much together, loved so much together. And they would continue day by day, hand in hand, until the very end. "I would do it all again," Harrison whispered into her hair. "Every moment exactly the same." "So would I," Rose whispered back. "So would I." And in that moment, sitting together on their porch with their life spread out around them, they were complete. The rebellious bride and the cowboy who needed a challenge had found exactly what they were looking for, and in the finding, had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story was one of love and partnership, of mutual respect and growing devotion, of two strong-willed people who chose each other every day and never regretted it. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through their children and their children's children. The town would remember Rose for her fierce advocacy and Harrison for his fairness and hard work. But more than anything, they would be remembered as a love story, two people who found each other against all odds and built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harrison and Rose remained on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment they had been given together. They had started as strangers meeting on a dusty street in a small California town, and they would end as they had lived for decades, as partners and best friends and the great loves of each other's lives. It was, in every way that counted, a perfect ending to a beautiful story. And if anyone had asked them whether they would change anything, they would have both answered with a resounding no. Because every challenge, every disagreement, every moment of growth and compromise had led them to this perfect moment of peace and contentment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured. The rebellious spirit that had brought Rose to Ukiah all those years ago had never been tamed, only channeled into building something lasting. And the cowboy who had laughed and declared he needed someone who challenged him had found exactly what he asked for and so much more. Together, they had created not just a family and a ranch, but a legacy of love that would echo through the generations. Their story was complete, with no loose threads or unanswered questions. They had lived fully and loved deeply, and they faced whatever came next together, as they had faced everything for the past 25 years and more. It was a good ending, a happy ending, the kind of ending that comes from a life lived with intention and love. And as the night settled in around them, soft and star-filled, Harrison and Rose knew that they had found exactly what they were meant to find, exactly where they were meant to be. They were home in every sense of the word, and that was the greatest gift of all.